Hi, I'm Alistair Kendall and welcome to this session looking at some further examples of how we use the ILR. What we're going to cover is some examples of circumstances that might affect the way that students are returned in the ILR, some cases where we commonly see errors in reporting, and the sort of evidence we would expect to see from these cases. The first one we're going to look at is what happens when there's a change of mode. First one is what happens if there's a change of mode during the year. And in this case, the key action to be taken is that you close the full-time record by returning a Learn Act end date, the last date of engagement on the full-time course, along with an appropriate STU load that captures the activity undertaken in the year for the full-time course. If they then start studying in a part-time mode, you return them as having a new Learn start date after the Learn Act end date for the full-time work, even the day after, and you record for the remainder of the year the STU load for the part-time course. Now, for example, in the full-time, if they went to January, that would have been 50. Now they're studying, say, a half rate for the second half of the year at 25 STU load. They'd also get a new Learn Plan end date. Other fields that relate to the year of instance, such as fund comp, should all still refer to the original start date in September. And if they change mode between years, well, firstly, if the change in mode was known to the college in time for inclusion in the 1920 ILR, then the part-time record should be closed in the 1920 ILR with a Learn Act end date, as usual, the last date of engagement on the part-time course, again with withdrawal reason 40 and comp status 3. And then a new record would be opened for the full-time aim in the 2020 ILR with a Learn start date in September 20. If the change in mode was not known to the college in time for inclusion in the 1920 ILR, and we would encourage, where possible, that your communications internally should have determined that. But if not, then the part-time record should be closed in the 2021 ILR with a Learn Act end date as the last date of engagement on the part-time course, which would normally be in that previous academic year. So the STU load for that part-time record would have to be set to 0.1. It's actually 0, but to pass FIS validation has to have 0.1. And that indicates that there was no activity in the 2021 academic year for the part-time record. You then open the new record for the full-time aim, Learn start date in September as normal. We'll now look at what happens when they transfer between courses. Let's say a student enrolls on an HND in business in September 20. In November, the student decides to change to an HND in computing. So the record with the business aim should be closed with Learn Act end date as the last date of engagement on the business course. Again, withdrawal reason 40, comp status 3. And the STU load should capture the amount of activity for the business course. Then a new record is opened, Learn start date as the start of engagement with the computing course, and a STU load which will correspond to the activity in the academic year from the Learn start date to the end of the academic year. Again, all fields related to year of instance including type year fund comp, are determined by the original start date of September 20. What about interruptions in study? If a student enrolls on a degree in October 19, but during the summer break in 2020, the student decides to suspend their studies for a year before planning to return again in October 21. If the suspension is known to the college in time for inclusion in the 1920 ILR, then the record should be closed in the 1920 ILR with a Learn Act end date as last date of engagement and comp status of 6. No record would be returned for the student in the 2021 ILR, but when the student returns as planned, a new record would be opened as normal with a Learn Start date in October 21. You would also want to return the original Learn Start date and the restart indicator for this record. If the suspension of study was not known to the college in time for inclusion in the 1920 ILR, then it would have to be closed in the following year, in the 2021, with the Learn Act end date, as usual, the last date of engagement, which of course would be in the previous academic year, and comp status as 6. Stu load should be set to 0.1 to indicate that there was no activity in the 2021 academic year. When the student returns, as planned, a new record would then be opened for the restarted aim in the 2021-22 ILR and with a Learn Start date of October 21. The original Learn Start date and the restart end indicator should be recorded for this record. If the student suspends partway through a year and restarts in the same year, then the original record should be closed with a Learn Act end date as the last date of engagement, in this example in November, with a comp status of 6. A Stu load should capture the amount of activity undertaken between October and November. Then when the student returns, a new record would be opened for the restarted aim with a Learn Start date in February 21, and then the Stu load would capture the activity between February and the end of the academic year. Original Learn Start date and restart indicator should also be completed for this record, although type year of fund comp should continue to be determined from the student's original start date in October 20. Now we look at students retaking modules. The first example is student retaking module after the course would normally have finished and with attendance. So a student finishes their foundation degree in May 2020, undertakes the final assessments but fails to achieve the qualification. They then decide to retake the modules they failed in 2021, including retaking tuition, to enable them to achieve their qualification. In the 2019-20 record, the student's record should be closed with an outcome 3, not achieved. A new record should then be returned in 2021 to report the activity the student is retaking. Now this is likely to also include a change of mode if they're only taking a small number of modules. If they are retaking without attendance, having attempted all modules, then they retake the assessments for the modules they failed in 2021 with no tuition to enable them to achieve their qualification. So in 2019-20, the student's record should be closed with outcome equals 3, not achieved, but no record should be returned in 2020-21 as the student is not undertaking any activity other than assessments. Further example is retaking without attendance and attempting some modules for the first time. A student finishes their foundation degree but does not undertake the final assessments for one or more modules and fails to achieve the qualification. They take the assessments for the modules they failed in 2021 with no tuition to enable them to achieve their qualification. In 2019, the student's record is not closed. In 2021, the student's record is closed with Learn Act end date reflecting the last date of activity towards the learning aim and STU load of 0.1 as there is no teaching activity. Much of the guidance for these examples comes from the ILR Provider Support Manual, and you'll find it's got a really good index for finding the different circumstances where you may need to return different values for those students. So please make use of that. So thank you for listening, and I hope these examples help you to cover some of the more difficult cases as you return the ILR.